Jesus is approached by two groups of people not long after he embarrassed some of the religious leaders in Israel. If you go back a little earlier in the book of Mark, to the stuff we looked at a week ago, and usually at this point in time I say, go back and watch it on the internet, but we kind of messed up and didn't get taped last week, which is my fault. I didn't put all the equipment back there. But the idea, when you go back and read the passage anyways, that Jesus was asked about some of his authority, and then when he refuted that, then we get to another passage in which he tells a story, a parable, in which a number of people are sent to a group of tenants from a landowner. They keep getting rejected. Finally, the owner sends his son to collect the rent. They kill him. Well, at this stage, the religious leaders know that he's talking about them, and they're incensed. But Jesus ends it with this incredibly bizarre twist, a wonderful twist at the end of the passage, in which he says, that son, the one who is rejected, is going to be the one who is in charge forever. The dead son. That's quite the twist. Well, now they are really ticked off, the religious leaders. So we get this really bizarre mix right now. The Pharisees are the religious leadership. They are the ultra-conservatives in their society. There's another group in there that we don't see as often in the Bible called the Herodians. They would be the other side of the political spectrum, on the left side. They're the ones who called for people to get along with the Romans. They supported the Roman authorities. They were the ones who were kind of, we all just get along. It'll work out. Eventually the Romans will let us go. We should support them. Pharisees hated Rome. Herodians loved Rome. They come up to Jesus and they ask this baited question about taxes with the thought if he says, no, you shouldn't pay taxes, well, the Herodians are going to be mad and have ammunition to take back to the Romans. If he says, yes, you should pay taxes, then the Pharisees who hate Rome, well, they have ammunition to go back and take it to the people and the court of public opinion and say, look at him. He loves the hated Roman officials. Jesus answers with great wisdom. Incredible wisdom. He blows them completely out of the water with his answer. And if we read his answer quickly, we can miss what he is really trying to say. Because the answer is basically, boy, you're wrong about everything here. You're worried about something that does not matter. Old traditions, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. That's fine. But the real point of this, render to God what is God's. Let's talk about this. First of all, this whole give to Caesar bit. Because it's been a really big topic throughout the ages, hasn't it? You can certainly hear taxes still being complained about around here, can't you? Anybody here ever complain about that? No, you don't raise your hand. In their day, there were certainly tax revolts, there were struggles. And in Jesus' answer, what's really incredible is he legitimizes the reign of Caesar Tiberius, who is the emperor of Rome at this time. He's hated by the Jewish people, but Jesus gives them a place. And even in Jesus' answer, there is a thought that there's some accountability that the Caesar has to God for the taxes that are paid, because really, God's put the Caesar in place. And that guy's going to have to talk to God someday. He's going to stand before the throne of God, and God will ask him, so what'd you do with all that tax money? Was it legitimate? Was it not? It takes a lot of faith in God for someone in our day and age to hand money over to a government and say, well, I know God will hold them to account one day. The Romans and Jews were frustrated with each other at this point in time. Absolutely frustrated. This was a time of great peace. You may have noticed on the title of the sermon, I've called this Pax Romana. If you don't speak much Latin, you may wonder, what on earth is that all about? It's a Latin term to describe this era, and it means the peace of Rome. Rome had become so big and so powerful, there was nobody who was an enemy left. Everybody kind of got along under the authority of the Caesars. That allowed trade to expand, it allowed roads to be built, bandits who usually lived in the forests and along the roads to waylay travelers, they were taken care of. There were no pirates in the sea anymore. They had taken care of all the threats. And most of the nations that lived under their rule at this stage were actually very grateful. They got along with Rome. They liked Rome. Everybody except this one little corner of Palestine. They just didn't seem to get along with anybody. And the Romans were frustrated with them, and they were frustrated with Rome. Right then, as Jesus is talking, there had been a tax revolt and several other revolts because they felt that the Romans were wasting their tax money. Do you know what the Romans were doing with the tax money? They were doing something that the Jews couldn't believe they were doing. They were trying to bring clean water to Jerusalem. Well, the nerve of them. And the Romans could not understand why the Jews were upset about this. And part of it had to do with the fact that they were working on the Sabbath, and part of it had to do with some of the coins that we're going to get to in a minute that they had to pay their taxes with. And some of it was just because they didn't like the Romans, no matter what they did. And so there was being two big revolts, actually, in the last little bit, when Jesus says this, against the Romans to try to stop this aqueduct from being built to Jerusalem. This is the coin that Jesus calls for. I don't suppose too many could read it. On the back side it says Maximus Pontifex, which means great priest or high priest. A picture of the Caesar saying, I am the one who stands between the gods of all the world and the people. And why can he do that? Because part of the inscription on the front side where it claims that Tiberius Caesar had a little bit of divine inspiration within his very being. They called it the genius of the Caesars. The fact that the gods actually helped the Caesars to reign. This coin that they used was blasphemous to the Jews. They didn't like it. And that was part of the problem. The coins as well were a symbol of authority. I mean, the Romans could mint coins, pass them out. They didn't like anybody else being in charge. It was a sign somebody else was in charge. We don't want anybody else in charge. They weren't popular. And when we read this, we see Jesus almost allowing for the civil authorities to reign. And maybe that they had some responsibilities. They had to pay their taxes like everybody else. Nobody liked that. There are parts of this that are a little different for us because, of course, if we don't like our taxes and if we think they're unjust, we have a responsibility in a democracy to say something about it. It's a little different for us. I do think we speak out against unjust taxes. But you know what the bottom line is? Jesus says, if you're really worried about this, you need to find something more productive to be worried about. You need to find something more productive. Look at this verse. Render to Caesar's things that are Caesar's, and to God things that are God's. Jesus twists their question. He is taking it so the taxes are not the main idea of these verses. They are an example. They are an example of something that can become something that grabs our attention, something that grabs at our heart, something that gets us all riled up, that really is secondary. Taxes are just an example of something that can pull our heart away from the things of God. Because, they can annoy us, right? Every month I get a check, and I look at it, it's not quite the amount that the budget says I should get paid, right? We see it in front of us all the time. Once a year, the government makes us fill out all these forms that are really hard to fill out. Taxes stand in front of us. They are an example of something that bug us that we can't avoid. They're always in front of our eyes. They force their way onto our consciousness. But do they really matter a whole lot? In the light of eternity, does our tax rate really matter? Picked a song that we sang a few minutes ago, 10,000 Reasons. We sang at the beginning of the service. Talked about how long we're going to praise God for, and it picks up an echo of something that we sing sometimes in the song Amazing Grace. It said, we're going to be singing for 10,000 years and then forevermore. 10,000 years, do you think the tax rate today is really going to matter a whole lot? Do you think we're gonna be sitting in the glory of eternity, worried about what the tax rate was back in the year 2014? Ultimately, is that the greatest worry in our life? Do we spend all our energy worrying about things that we cannot really change? There are a lot of things, and tax is just an example. There are a lot of things that can take us away from what really matters. You ever had a bully in your life? Somebody who just, they have this way of pushing your buttons and getting you all upset and angry. That's another example of something that comes into our life that we cannot change, that can take all of our energy. I run across people all the time who come into my office and say, boy, I wish my spouse would change, but nothing's ever seeming to change them. Well, okay, if nothing's going to change them, then why are you going to spend all your time worrying about it? Honestly, we'll always find things that bug us between two people. Sometimes people let illness, which can drain us very legitimately, and just let that become the focus of my entire life. If it is not in your realm to change it, don't take up a mission to change it. Things like this are a distraction. They are things that take our energy, they take our focus, and they put them on things that really we can't do. The Jewish people were loving sitting around debating taxes to Caesar. And I think what Jesus' basic message to them was this: Tiberius Caesar is not listening. Tiberius Caesar doesn't even care. Maybe you should be worried about something that is going to make a difference in the light of eternity. Something that will matter in 10,000 years. Something that will be important later. We need to find ways to take our attention off things that will pass away and put our hearts towards things of eternity that will matter forever. Give to God the things that are God's. God's kingdom even more so than Tiberius Caesar's, was legitimate as well. And it takes priority. Jesus takes away this whole argument about taxes and points him towards what truly matters. This morning, beginning of Sunday school, I pulled a couple of the classes together, talk about something that really doesn't matter a whole lot. They mean kids coming in, doing lots of crafts, using up all the craft supplies. And we've been trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep a little bit of control here? And so we put up some new cupboards, and they were up too high for the kids to get at. So I just had to say, don't try to climb up there. You know, in the end, we do have to find ways to look after our stuff, but in the end, you know, I'm just kind of glad that the kids want to come and do crafts at church. I mean, ultimately, whether we run out of construction paper, I mean, we should look after that, but does that matter in 10,000 years? Does the fact that the kids learn to love Jesus here matter in 10,000 years? Yeah, I get it. Baby cries in church, it's a little distracting, or all Jeff's kids come to visit him while he's up on stage. I noticed Peyton didn't make it on stage this morning. He's not far away from making it onto stage either. I mean, does it matter they come up on the stage? Does it matter, though, that they feel welcome at church and they learn to worship Jesus? Yeah. That's what matters. You know, it's remarkable how in the little things of life that annoy us, we can either be annoyed or we can find Jesus. I told a couple of people this week, I'm about ready for spring. You know what the bottom line is, though? You can either look outside and see slippery conditions, or we can look outside and see the beauty of God and snow. I mean, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Even in some of the greatest catastrophes of our world, there is beauty. I've been reading a little bit about some of these brave folks who are working in the midst of Ebola in West Africa, and saying, we've got a great disaster there perhaps, but you know what's even better to look at is the fact that we have a God who's gifted people and given people the courage and the strength to do the impossible. And you know what? Maybe that's what our focus should be. Because the bottom line is we have a God who is marvelous, who has a great plan for our world. And we need to render to God what is God's. And what does God want? We need to give Him our energy, our attention, our worship, our prayers. Every once in a while somebody asks me, why on earth would you come to church to sing songs to God? Is He that egotistical that He has to listen to us sing songs about Him? And that's not it at all. Once you become a Christian, we discover this remarkable thing. The music draws our attention to the beauty and to the heavenly realms. That it captures our hearts and brings us somewhere. That it's not about God needing to hear about Himself. It's about us needing to express in a beautiful way the greatest beauty that exists. God doesn't need to listen to our prayers. God knows what's going on. We don't have to gossip to Him. That's not the idea. He doesn't need the information. But He needs to know that our hearts are on things that are eternal, and that we're willing to take up the greatest honor that we can have, and that is talking to the King of Kings. We pass around the offering plate. God doesn't need our money. We give financially, it's not because God's broke or something, but it's so that we can show that the things that are temporary of this earth that we usually use money for are secondary to things that are going to last forever. And then we want to give towards that. That's our priority. We need to sing the praises of Jesus more and complain less. That's the bottom line. What a great honor we have to sing the praises of our God. I've told the story of, actually, just before I get to the story, I want to put this up. We sang this a few minutes ago. When I look into your holiness, when I gaze into your loveliness, when all things that surround become shadows in the light of you. Aren't you glad I didn't sing that? When we look at these things, what happens? I like this. When I found the joy of reaching out, when my will becomes enthroned in your love, when all things that surround become shadows in the light of you. In other words, the more I look at God, what happens to the rest of the stuff? They become shadows in the light of God. This is my story. I've told this before, but it's been a few years. So nobody probably remembers, and I know nobody can read what's on that plaque. But it's about a man named Henry Allen. And this plaque is dedicated to him. Born in Newport, Rhode Island in 1760, came with his parents to Falmouth, Nova Scotia. Had a remarkable conversion experience at age 27. Began to preach with great zeal and effectiveness, often taking his text from Ephesians 5:14. Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. Was leader in the New Light movement, which influenced later development of Baptist churches, wrote over 500 hymns, 2 books of theology, and a renowned journal. Died on a preaching mission to New England at age 35 and was buried in New Hampshire. Inscribed on his tombstone, he was a burning and shining light and justly acclaimed the Apostle of Nova Scotia. Now, why am I reading this? I love his story. He was born in Rhode Island. He came to Nova Scotia as a young man when he was about 11 or 12. It was at that time that Nova Scotia had just passed over from the French possession to British possession. The British were determined to make Nova Scotia, which at that time, by the way, included New Brunswick, they were determined to turn this into kind of the northern outpost of their New England colonies. They invited colonists from other New England colonies to move north and to come start settling what was basically the Wild West, even though it's the far east of Canada, but the Wild West at that time of the British North America. Henry and his family moved up there. He was from a remarkably pagan background. He was, I think, the inventor of the Canadian idea of bush parties, actually. Him and his friends would go in the bush and drink all night. God got a hold of his life in a remarkable way. There are 3 different moments of time where God broke into Henry's life. God did something remarkable to change his heart. And on one of those occasions, God spoke to him greatly. I want you to go preach in your church, in your town's church. So in the town of Falmouth, Nova Scotia, he got up one Sunday, he asked me to talk. He started preaching, and he started preaching. To the point that by the end of the service, the congregation ordained him. And told him, do you know what? You just preached a remarkable sermon. I want you to go around. I want you to preach that sermon in every town in Nova Scotia. He was 27 years old. He traveled from town to town throughout Nova Scotia. He preached, and he led thousands of people to learn to love Jesus Christ as their Savior. Along the way, he wrote over 500 songs. It was said he didn't like singing the same song twice. So he just kept writing songs. And we don't sing a lot of them now, because if you write 500 songs over 8 years, a lot of them are going to be bad. But anyways, he gave it his best go of it. And he wrote over 500 songs. On top of that, he wrote these books that it talks about. He did all that, and then he went south. He got called to New Hampshire, and he got there and quickly actually got tuberculosis, and he died at what we would consider a very young age, 35. That wasn't quite so young, unfortunately, in the 1700s. And he died without realizing the greatest influence he was going to have on Canada. And that was the fact that pretty much that we have Canada. I first ran across Henry while studying Canadian history at the University of Alberta. I had a professor who talked about him, and he actually didn't like Henry. Mostly because of what he preached, and this professor didn't like what he preached. I did. You look at the dates of this, when he came to Christ was 1775. What is happening in New England in 1775? Boston Tea Party. New England is rising up against taxes. It starts in Massachusetts, it spreads out throughout New England. They start sending people throughout the colonies to declare this revolution against taxes. They go down far south, down to Georgia, and all the spots in between. They head north. They're going through Connecticut. They're going through Rhode Island. They're going west to New York and Pennsylvania. And people are, yeah, we don't like paying taxes either. Yeah, maybe we should rebel, yeah. They get to Nova Scotia, and they start telling the story of Nova Scotia, and everybody says, yeah, you make a point, but we want to worship Jesus. Instead of talking about taxes, why don't we go worship Jesus? Why don't we go sing these songs that Henry's teaching us? And Nova Scotia does not rebel because they're too busy singing about Jesus. One of the big reasons we have Canada today. Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and probably eventually Prince Rhode, they all do not rebel because they're too busy singing about Jesus. They're too busy worshiping. You know, look him up. He's in Canadian history. You see, in the end, it had nothing to do with taxes. It was all about distractions. And Jesus looking at this is a distraction. This is something that doesn't matter. Do you know what doesn't matter? Singing the praises of Jesus. That matters. Going around telling people about Jesus, that matters. Bringing people to the glory of the kingdom of God, you know, that matters. Keep your heart focused on what matters. So we're going to sing a song of just simple, majestic worship to finish off. It's hymn number 10 in our songbooks if you want to follow along. Praise to thee, Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation.